All right, Carlos,
Hey.
how are you? Welcome everyone to the Food Tech News Show for April 19th, 2024. My name is Michael Wolf, and I'm joined by Carlos Rodela, who's trying to do something weird with the graphics. I don't know what's going on.
I was
Carlos.
trying a bunch of new things. Got a new background. Who knows? There's the Food Tech News Show. Welcome.
Yeah, it looks like you're on the set of ABC News. Is that what
I'm
you're
also there.
from?
I do that in my evening hours.
Yeah, after this, you're anchoring the evening news.
Yep.
I don't know if they have evening news anymore. I think that's an old thing.
They do, and I'm on it.
They do. Okay. All right. And we also have with us one of my favorite people in the world of food tech and food innovation, Mike Lee, founder of the Future Market and author of a new book called Mies, which I'm excited to talk about. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, how you doing, Mike? Thanks for having me. It's good to see you, Carlos.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
I think we've known each other for a while. I've probably seen you in New York. I know I broke bread with you in Bologna, Italy at some point at the
in a
Future
basement.
Institute.
It was wild.
Whoa.
In a weird basement. Yeah. So there's some stories there. But hey, we'll maybe get to this if we have time. And we're also going to spend some time, Mike, diving deep into your book, which I think you just published. I've been reading the first chapter and I really love it. I love the pictures, and we'll show some pictures. Carlos, you got some of those lined up so we can show Mike's pictures. All right.
Thank you.
Right.
Cool. Can't wait.
But before we get to that, we're going to talk about some of the stories of the week. And the first one up is the story about Bor and Hungary, the restaurant that was created around an NFT, a Bored Ape NFT, has closed. And I don't know if you saw this news, Mike. I thought it was an interesting one. To give some background to the viewers, in March 2022, NFT and crypto investor Andy Nguyen had purchased a Bored Ape NFT along with 3 mutant apes, and soon decided to start a Bored Ape themed restaurant named Bor and Hungary. The restaurant opened its doors on April 9th, 2022, and by the end of the first day, had around 1,500 burgers served and a line stretched around the block. And just this week, we learned that Bor and Hungary had closed. Nguyen went on Instagram to talk about the closing and said that he had sold the concept to a franchising company out of Asia called Hungry DAO. You know, Mike, we've seen a number of these NFT focused efforts in the culinary world kind of go kaput. Some of them are still going along. I don't know if any of them are thriving. What's going on here?
I think the thing with NFTs is that the main value of these things, I don't think is the actual technology of the NFT. It's the community you can build around it, obviously. I mean, why do baseball cards still sell for thousands of dollars, vintage baseball cards, but, a lot of the NFTs don't anymore, right? Is because there's enough people out there that implicitly agree that I will pay this much money for a baseball card. Now, I mean, it's just a piece of paper, right? But honestly, like, value in the world is whatever a critical mass decide it is, right? And so I think the thing with the NFT is, like, I think people just said, like, there was almost this mentality of saying, just because it's an NFT and it's on the blockchain means it's inherently valuable. Well, not really, you have to, and yeah, we had this huge cash grab up front because people were, I think, running on just like FOMO and like Monster Energy drink. They were just trying to get everything they could. And then it just kind of petered out, So, I don't think it's like the death of the NFT as a technology per se. I just think that iteration of it, nobody could keep up the critical mass and the excitement around long enough to keep a burger restaurant or a piece of art going, or even just a market for buying and selling. So I think that's just a flaw of lack of community support.
There, Carlos, for those listening, apologies you can't see this, but Carlos, you brought up a picture of the Bor and Hungary themed restaurant look. There's a burger, there's a fries with the Bored Ape on it. It's not just Bor and Hungry, Mike. We've seen Starbucks put essentially an end to their NFT efforts. Celebrity chef Spike Mendelsohn and Tom Colicchio had their Shefy Pizza NFT project, which I think by all means looks kind of defunct.
Yeah.
And we've seen some other kind of high profile flameouts. I think that, a lot of focus for these guys was, a big focus on, hey, this is cool. Let's do an NFT. Let's be first arrivers. I think guys like Fly Fish Club realized that you have to have utility, real world utility.
Yeah.
And you have to be realistic. And so they've made a few little pivots. The guys who started Fly Fish Club, including Gary Vaynerchuk, that they're actually going to allow people who don't have an NFT join their dining club. So they kind of made this recognition that, hey, we need to pivot. Not everyone's ready to go onto the blockchain. And so if we want to make this thing successful, we have to be flexible.
I think that's, yeah.
I mean, it's got to be backed by real stuff, right? Before we got off the gold standard, we had the gold standard, right? And the paper money inherently wasn't worth anything. It was backed by the physical gold that was actually worth something. Only until did America become a massive superpower and like rewrote the world order did we get to a place where we could get off the gold standard, right? Because people are like, okay, we get it, we trust you, right? And so, with somebody like Flyfish, you've got obviously a real influential person with a massive following in Gary, and you've got like real, chef, Josh Capon behind that. You've got a real thing, right? So I think those are the things that are probably going to succeed more, but I don't think they're going to succeed because they're an NFT club. I think they're just going to succeed because they have a great community and they're good chefs and they deliver a good experience, right? So, yeah.
To Mike's point, like you have to have it like make sense for your business. You can't just, we've seen this before. There's so many new technologies that come out and a company just wants to jump on it because, like you said, Mike, it's the bandwagon, like get on it. But it has to make sense. It can't just be attached to some burgers and some fries. Although those look really good.
It did look like a pretty good burger.
Yeah. So
I'm a smash burger aficionado. So
all right.
Specimen.
Smash cast.
So what about hot buns in the metaverse? I don't know if you saw the story that Wow Bao had launched hot buns into Roblox. Carlos, I think you did a little video on that.
Oh yeah, let me try to find the picture of that. Yeah.
So the founder of Wow Bao, Jeff Alexander, jumps on almost every new technology, and they launched their NFT driven membership club last year, and they went into Roblox this year. And I asked him, I called him on the phone. I go, what's going on? You're not necessarily going to drive revenue for this in any foreseeable future. And he said he thinks that at some point, whether it's a year from now, 3 years from now, or 5 years from now, he just wants to be there because he thinks at some point it will. I think as a strategy, Mike, that's kind of a valid thing. If you just want to be a first driver, if you just want to have a lot of these initiatives and recognize that the payoff may not be there for years, then I think a company like Wow Bao makes sense to do something like that.
I don't think that's a bad strategy. I mean, especially I think the key thing within that is he chose to be within a thing that was already a platform, I can't speak to the nuances of Roblox. I'm not on Roblox, but from what I understand, there's a lot of people that are, right? And so I think that'll give you a head start, but yeah, again, probably make that investment kind of as lean as you can for now, because it's not going to pay for itself per se. It's just a thing you do to be there.
Yeah, we did a video on it, and I was like, I don't know if anybody playing Roblox cares about this. And also, the number one thing that people care about in Roblox, is digital goods, like actual in-game stuff. Yeah. And so this is the opposite. It's IRL stuff. So you think that might be a driver, but at the end of the day, most people who are playing Roblox want things for Roblox.
What does it do actually? The Wow Bao thing? You get
like a credit for
it's a mini game. It's a mini game within Roblox, and you can actually go in there and get 3 achievements, which took me all of 5 minutes. I'm not really even a gamer. And then I got a UGC, whatever it's called, Carlos, a little Wow Bao for my head to wear. But it also gave me the promise of a free box of Wow Bao, like a coupon, which I thought, hey, I was actually more interested in getting the IRL Wow Bao that I could eat than like
right. You are, good. But because you're not a Roblox player.
Because I'm an old guy, who wants to just eat hot buns.
Yeah. So. Oh, let's not take that out of context. Yeah. Anyway, check this out. Here's the video real quick. You can now visit a hot bun vending machine in the metaverse. Wow Bao launching in Roblox marks the first time that a fast casual restaurant has launched in the metaverse with a loyalty program that gives away IRL perks. Those perks being a free box of Wow Bao products, which a player qualifies for once they enter the Wow Bao minigame. The obvious question then arises, but can we earn a digital Bao hat of some sort? That's all they want.
I did get the digital Bao hat. So
yeah.
I mean, I'm with Carlos. I'm not a Roblox expert, but like I too probably I would have leaned in on something that you would earn that is really valuable if you're in Roblox. whatever that is.
I think it's hard for a corporate to say, hey, which most kids in Roblox haven't heard of, to say, here's a really valuable thing, because unless there's like a huge amount of like digital equity, or if someone like if Marvel came out and say, hey, there's like 1,000, Avengers NFTs are going to give out on Roblox, and those would be in demand, right? So I think it's hard for like a food brand to do that.
I just think like you got to just show the numbers of how much DLC some of these gaming platforms sell. And like, I mean, there's like mining farms in China where people just mining experience in coin, right? I mean, that doesn't exist if people aren't willing to pay for it, right? So I don't know. I agree with you. They're not native to the thing, but if I was giving a presentation, I'd be like, hey, look how much people are actually paying for stuff that's just the pixels, because it's got meaning to it, right?
Yeah.
In game.
We know what? Before we leave this story, though, I just thought of something, like, to play devil's advocate to my own sentence and my own statement. Like, that idea of getting food delivered to you while you're gaming is still attractive, right? Like ordering Domino's in game. I think I remember a game did that at some point, an MMO, and it was like, whoa, really? Like, my character ordered Domino's and it arrived at my door. I think there's still something there. It's just, again, having that connective tissue of like, how does it work for the player? Because if it's just like a coupon, am I going to go to the place?
Yeah. If it feels very first generation implementation. I think the long-term inclination that maybe Wow Bao, because they're really a nationwide restaurant brand architected around using a lot of ghost kitchens and different points of presence in different cities. So they're probably on a lot of like Uber Eats apps. So if you could ultimately order while you're playing a game, I think that's probably the vision for Jeff. I just think this is first gen, and he's just getting the stake in the ground. So we'll see where that goes. Because I think you're right. Gamers want to eat. They want to order pizza. Maybe now they want to order bao. Who knows? Let's move on to the next story. This one, I think you'll have some opinions on, Mike. So Fast Company had an article titled "How Fast Food is Becoming a New Surveillance Ground." And this article examined how new customer interaction layers are using things like bio authentication with cameras. They're looking at your profile information, and they're becoming more of a risk for and a breeding ground for potential fraud as they gather more information about you. We also saw this week that another company called Steak and Shake launched a new facial recognition technology. This is kind of weird to me. Why a nationwide steak restaurant would put facial identification for check-in and check-out. And they used a technology from a company called Pop ID, and they put out a PR saying, hey, you could come to our steak restaurant and you could check in with your face. It just seemed kind of like a disjointed fit. It doesn't seem like a steakhouse would be the type of place where people would want to come and check in with their face. Mike, what is going on here?
Well, it's not really a steakhouse. Many, it's a steakhouse in name, I think.
Okay. But any restaurant, like what's...
I think my view on private, I don't know. I think like my view on this is kind of like a big general principle, is that whenever you're trying to get somebody to offer up a piece of personal data, you need to offer some form of utility.
Did Mike's video freeze?
We lost you.
Hey, I'm back.
You're back.
And edit.
You said you need to exchange some form of personal utility.
You need some kind of personal utility that makes it feel worthwhile to give up some piece of information, right? I look at something like Clear at the airport, right? They're doing retina scans, but like for me, that to me seems like a good calculus of like, okay, I'm willing to give up that amount of privacy because I can cut sometimes hour-long line and like make a flight that I wouldn't have made, right? That makes a lot of sense. And I'm in this context of like, I'm already in an airport where I'm assuming everything is recorded anyway. So like, what's another scan, right? They already know every single thing about me. But like, I don't know if I really want my face recorded at a Steak and Shake at 2 a.m.
Yeah, you definitely don't want it at 2 a.m. And like
something
that you made a great point. Like,
I don't know what they going through. I'm not saying that it's not possible. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I think like somebody like Steak and Shake, they'd have to give so much value for somebody, I think, to consider kind of giving some of that privacy over. Or maybe the consumer at Steak and Shake just isn't even, they're not listening to this podcast. They don't think about this stuff. And they're like, sure, whatever, but generally I think, yeah, you gotta kind of make it worthwhile to do this privacy stuff.
Mike, we just lost your video, but we'll edit that out. See if you can maybe restart your camera. And I'll show the picture of Steak and Shake, which is not a steak restaurant. It is definitely a fast food. A lot of steak on a bun, which makes me hungry, by the way.
Yeah.
But the fine print is famous for steak burgers.
There you go.
That is the type of place you don't go. You don't want to show your face at 2 a.m. You're kind of embarrassed to go there maybe at 2 a.m. And you're not your best self at that point.
I don't want my biometrics at a Steak and Shake.
But you make a great point. Like the context of going through the airport and using your face. And the last few times I've gone through TSA, they've actually taken a picture of me. And so we're getting used to that. I'm generally okay with giving up some biometric information, probably more so than most people, probably because I experiment a little bit. I did the Palm Pay at Starbucks, which a lot of people thought was maybe crazy, but I just figured, hey, I want to try it. But that didn't stick. I know that they were trying it here in the Northwest and they pulled it out. Mm-hmm. So, but I think that inevitably we're going to see more of this biometric ID just come. But like what you say, let me ask you this. As it becomes more common, Mike, do you think people will just more freely give it up, or do you think they're going to want this utility and this value in exchange?
Well, so like I'm 44, and so that's my opinion, because I have a history of living before this stuff existed, right? I think the real kind of question is ask somebody 20 years, 30 years younger than me to see what they think, because they don't have the same context that I do, right? And I think you could have this kind of situation where like people like us kind of slowly die off. And then all of a sudden
by eating too much Steak and Shake burgers.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, like a new generation springs up with a different set of context around this stuff. So they'll either maybe care more about it and be more militant about it, or not care at all. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, that makes me sound that they won't care, because like, you know, we of our age and generation are accepting of it, and young people are accepting of even more. Like, I just feel like it's just part of the norm, like just like a lot of things like phones, etc. So
it is, but I remember at like South by like 7 years ago, I heard, I think it was Dana Boyd. She was a reason, and she had this talk about how millennials, and that was back when millennials were still considered young, like how millennials are like Gen Z, were in high school, and how savvy they were around things like Facebook. Like she was documenting this whole crowd of people in high school, teenagers that were using Facebook, and every time they'd log off Facebook, they wouldn't just log off or shut the app down or shut the web page down. They would deactivate their full account. And the reason why they did that was, and then they'd reactivate it when you re-sign in. And the reason why they did that, because their worst nightmare was like being in like gym class, and then like during that period, somebody posts a bunch of embarrassing stuff about you and you can't do anything about it. And in the 45 minutes, you're like, you know, in gym class, it goes viral and your whole reputation's ruined. But if you're deactivated, and tag you on and stuff like that. So yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely something to be said about digital natives kind of caring less about some of these things, but they also find new ways to kind of be just more savvy about it because of things like that.
I think that's actually a good point, because it's like the younger generation is both. Like they're on both sides of it. They're like, we accept it, but we also want these rules in place or these things in place because we are so, like you said, savvy. We had a question from chat. Mike, do you want to read it?
We can actually bring it up on stage. I'll drop it on. I'll put it on here. So Lars Crook says, to the point of privacy versus convenience, could the gaming platform benefit from acting as a proxy and being the sole entity that is in possession of identity? I don't know if that's a question you can answer, Mike.
Could the gaming being the sole identity? You mean, so I think it's maybe saying like, is your identity a part of your real identity? I mean, I don't know. I guess, again, I think it's cultural, right? Because I think there's probably some people that take gaming so seriously that their online avatar feels like an extension of them. Like, I don't know if it's going to bleed into like having legal repercussions or like, you know, legal weight, but yeah, I don't know. But I think that's interesting to think about in the future as this stuff becomes more prolific.
Yeah, the gaming. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was going to say, we talked about young people and worrying about fraud. I think the whole wave of deep fakes coming and kind of people being able to essentially recreate your exact likeness is something that I think is going to be like the new battleground, essentially.
Yeah, the avatar versus the deep fake versus who are we anymore? Before we leave this topic, I did a little AI art like I always do every show. And this is with a free version of AI art. So I always put that out there. It's not the best. And so it does some really funny things. And so because we were talking about facial recognition for fast food restaurants, I just said that. I said, make me some facial recognition at a fast food restaurant. This one's not bad. It's not the same person. So that's kind of weird. This is for our visual video audience only. But I had to show because it gets real weird here. This is, well, no, hold on. This one's kind of normal. It's still whatever. Okay, this is the weird one. What's happening?
I feel like every time I don't know if it's your prompt engineering, but last time you also had people's faces turning into pizzas. So I don't know. Maybe Mike can teach you something. Maybe Mike can either lend you.
That's what you look like when you eat at Steak and Shake.
Okay, you know what? It's accurate. That's actually accurate.
That's actually a real photo from Steak and Shake. It's a live.
We were just talking about
your face breaks out into hamburger.
But we were just talking about getting digital goods and hats. And look, this person has a digital hamburger hat. Anyways, AI art is sometimes awesome and sometimes terrible, but I think it's great.
Yeah. Well, we'll be looking at some of Mike's AI art. So, and we'll kind of compare.
Much better.
We'll look at the prompt engineering skills of both you guys in contrast. But before that, we got one more story. We're kind of veering into now a little bit on the alt protein side. I thought this was an interesting story. I mean, frankly, there's been a lot of alt protein stories and a lot of cultivated meat stories over the past couple weeks. This one though caught my attention because Val is about a company called Val out of Australia. It's a Sydney-based startup, and just this week they launched its cultivated Japanese quail, and they are selling that in the Singapore market because, as many people know who follow cultivated meat, that's one of the countries that has okayed it at the kind of the country regulatory level. They got the regulatory okay to go ahead with the product. Unlike other rollouts of cultivated meat where chefs had supplied the meat or supplied with the meat itself, Val is taking a novel approach where they're basically creating a parfait that they're calling Cultivated Quail. I thought, Mike, this is an interesting approach. They're a little bit different than what I've seen. I had my first cultivated meat about a month ago. A lot of the times people were tasting it here in the US. It's like maybe a little percentage points of cultivated meat molecules and a lot of plant-based meat. From what I'm reading with Val, they're trying to say that it's almost all cultivated meat cells, which I think is interesting. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is something I've been thinking about for a really long time. And these guys are actually one of the maybe first that I've seen do it, maybe second people I've seen to do this thing. So I think there's like two strategies on how you can approach lab grown meat, right? One is the strategy where I think virtually everyone has done, which is let's mimic the actual meat. Let's make a chicken breast taste like a chicken breast, a burger tastes like a burger, yada, 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 right? As we've seen, that's notoriously difficult, right? Even if you kind of nailed a steak perfectly, I don't know, there's still just something, I think, just something, it's just going to present itself differently unless you do a blind taste, right? So yep. I think that's the game that most people have played. I've been wondering for a long time why somebody doesn't just try to like sidestep that Herculean task of trying to imitate a real steak and just become its own thing, right? Mm-hmm, like I sometimes think about like, could we go back to the day that tofu was invented? What was tofu meant to mock? It wasn't meant to mock anything. It was just somebody was like, look, I made this thing out of soybeans. It's really good. And then 5,000 years later, it's like a part of like a culture's food, right? And so
by the way, what is spam? What is spam? I feel like that's a made up meat, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it makes a lot of, okay. I think I got to say one thing about the quail for parfait. The only thing that's throwing me off is the word parfait. And maybe that's just my context. Maybe parfait is a different context. But when I think of parfait, I think of like Dairy Queen, like layers of fruit and ice cream.
I grew up on peanut butter parfaits. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But then when I like clicked on the article and saw the links and the photos, I was like, oh, okay, this is just like a quail mousse. I was like, I would eat that. Like, sure, I would totally try that.
Parfait.
Oh, there it is.
That's a parfait.
You did. Oh. Yeah, Mike, so you make a great point there. I think one of the things that we've talked about a little bit on the show and just generally is this kind of weird jolt that people have, that is, I think, been framed as the uncanny valley of cultivated meat. So when you're trying to eat something and you think it's going to be hamburger or steak or chicken, and it's 95% there, but is off a little bit, your brain gets tricked or gets a little bit freaked out. And what you're saying is, why frame it that way? Why not just frame it as a completely different thing?
Yeah, and I think also like something like a mousse is somewhere in the middle, right? Because I think the degree of difficulty versus trying to nail a perfect quail like thigh, which has such a specific texture and taste to it, is they're probably making it a lot easier on themselves because they're just trying to make this kind of mush, so to speak, but you kind of fuzzy it up and call it like, you know, a mousse or something like that. I think you kind of, I don't think there's a right way or wrong way. I think you exchange one set of problems for another, right? Because I think if you're trying to mimic a steak, you don't have to explain to anybody what it's trying to be. Everybody knows what a steak or a piece of chicken is. However, you have the huge task of trying to live up to that image that everyone has burned in their palate about that. On the flip side, if you're trying to do something new, like, you know, let's pretend tofu never existed and we're trying to invent it. It's easier from a production standpoint because you don't have any like framework to live up to. But then the hard part is now you've got to go around explaining to everybody what this thing called tofu is you've just created, you know?
Yeah.
So I think you know, it's hard either way. It's just a different kind of hard.
We definitely talk about on the show a lot, Mike and I, and I think it's you're right on the spot of like what I think too is like I like veggie foods for what they are. Like they're a veggie thing that I like eating, and it's got a cool flavor. And there's different brands that I appreciate more than others. And I think we talked about Impossible last week or the week before, Mike, and like Impossible has chicken nuggets, and they're a little bit close to actual chicken in the chicken nuggets, and I'm like, stop it, just be whatever else, you know? So.
Yeah, it's funny. Like McDonald's chicken nuggets to me have always been like an alternative meat that aren't quite chicken, but you just somehow don't grow to like them because
not on purpose.
Comfortably in the uncanny valley, and it's like
it's been there
forever.
So, Mike, to your point, the CEO of Val basically had this as their strategy. He says in the piece written, I think it's on Green Queen, that cultivated meat makes sense as a way to create new, delicious foods, not imitate the food we already know and love, and we are proud to enjoy an entirely new category of food. So that was by design.
And I think that's kind of smart, and especially like because I think like the production levels of lab-grown meat right now, I can't really see making a case for a mass strategy at all because no one can make it in sufficient quantities. I totally think partnering with a high-end. I mean, I think definitely has to be like the iPhone 1 that's $1,500 for substandard performance, right? Because you can only really afford to make enough of these to kind of satisfy the high-end audience that's going to be a little bit more forgiving, has a lot of disposable income, and they're not going to just like complain about it. They're kind of in for the ride, and you do that for a while and build up sort of a halo effect and, keep it a little bit unattainable for a while until you can get to the point where you can mass produce it and then literally replace all the chicken nuggets and McDonald's with it, So I like his strategy in doing this. I just wish he called it a mousse instead of a parfait.
Well, speaking of mousse, I think we all can say and agree to this. No meat mousse ever. Come on. Who wants meat mousse?
Like am I alone? Mousse?
I don't want meat mousse.
Meat mousse sounds weird, but
yeah, it does sound weird. I like a good pate. I like a good pate. They should call it maybe a pate.
Yeah, pate. Yeah. All right. I'm thinking like chicken liver mousse, and now I guess you're right. Like aside from saying the words chicken liver and then mousse, it doesn't really make a lot of sense otherwise.
Maybe it's just the words together sound bad to me. That's maybe
because you think dessert and like savory dessert just sounds weird to me.
I know.
Like, what if you called it like moist meat mousse? You'd piss off everyone.
Oh no! We have to move on. Move on.
Yeah, we're moving on from moist meat mousse to mise.
Hey.
Well, that's Mike. It's your book. And how do you pronounce it? It's spelled M-I-S-E, but you pronounce it mise?
It's mise. So it's mise, short for mise en place. Mise en place in the culinary world, or as some people affectionately call your mise, is the prep work you have to do to get ready for the night service. The metaphor extends to what this book is all about, which is helping the food industry at large prepare for the future. If you're a line cook somewhere at a restaurant and you don't have your mise together, you're going to go down in flames at that night's dinner service. Same thing with the industry. If we don't kind of have our ducks together about planning properly for the future, we won't go down in flames as fast last as a one-night dinner service, but I think things can definitely go awry. So that's the spirit of the book, is trying to help the food industry think more creatively, expansively, and insightfully about the future of food.
Well, I know I've always known you to be a really excellent futurist. I love your peeking into the future, the methodologies you use, the way you frame things. I always enjoy that. And this book is no exception. It's a beautiful book. I noticed, and I think you talked about how you used AI to create a lot of the graphics, and they look great. I've been reading through one of the chapters. I think you have 4 chapters.
Yep.
And each one is a different scenario. Some much more dark than others. Some more dystopian. And then you have 5 different, I guess, driving forces that are shaping these different scenarios: politics, social dynamics, environment. Talk a little bit about that, how you kind of decided to come up with this framework and how you structured it.
Yeah, so the framework, it's called the STEEP framework. It's not a framework I came up with. It's kind of in the futurist profession. It's one of the old standbys. There's a bunch of different frameworks for it, but STEEP basically stands for social, technological, environmental, economic, and political. And essentially, if you're trying to look at a future of anything, really, if you can kind of imagine what it's like in each one of those letters in the acronym, you can kind of start to build a world together, right? So I think this is especially important in food, especially kind of the whole fertile ground of food trend reports. Is I think they just kind of spend all their time looking inwardly at the food, but you don't kind of look expansively at what's happening in politics, what's happening in economics, what's happening in technology. Food above all is the most interwoven into our lives. So I think if you want to study the future of food, you cannot just look at food trends from the food industry. You have to look at just life and world, right? And so the 5 STEEP factors, I've chosen 5 hot button topics in each of those categories. And in social, I talk about the eating habits. So are we going to eat predominantly ultra processed foods or better for you foods in the future? Technology, I look at generative AI. Is it going to be mostly helpful, mostly harmful? Economics, I look at the current debate around ESG investing. Are we going to be pro or anti that? Environmental, I look at regenerative versus degenerative agriculture. And then political, I look at how united or divided are we going to be in the future? So if you imagine each of those factors as kind of a slider going one way to the other, each of those 4 scenarios are born out of different combinations on those sliders. You can kind of see on the little star chart in each of the beginning. But basically what happened is, I kind of manipulated some of those dimensions and say, in the year 2042, or this one, the nutrition stack, here, society is at a 5 for eating really good, healthy food. We're eating really good, healthy food. Technology, generative AI is supercharging that. It's helping that. But the economy is very, not really supportive of the environment. The environmental agriculture system is very extractive, and the political system we're very, very divided, right? So you kind of look at those factors and you start to, that's your framework, and say, okay, what kind of world does that yield, right?
What I liked the way you did it, Mike, is you make it come alive through storytelling. And in this chapter, the nutrition stack, which is the one I read, you use the example of the family called the Burlingtons.
Yep.
And you talk about at the beginning of the chapter this idea of highly personalized and precision nutrition. And at the point, I think it's maybe 20, 30 years in the future, we have this thing called a stomach sensor, basically an embedded stomach sensor that is getting super dialed in information about what we're eating every day. And this story of this family on Thanksgiving, what's happening, I think most of them have this stomach sensor. It's pretty fascinating. And then it leads to some interesting questions. But how did you think of doing this? And then how did you write? Were you actually saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to write some fiction as well to kind of make it come alive?
Yeah. So each of the scenarios has 2 kind of sub chapters. One is kind of a bird's eye view of the industry, as if you were a journalist in that era doing an overview of the industry, right? And then you zoom into a really intimate portrait, and that one was the family called the Burlingtons. I mean, food, the industry is so interesting because the industry is one of the most massive, complicated things in the world. It's so big, but eating is the most intimate thing we do, right? So I think in order to understand the future of food, you've got to understand the macro and the micro. So that's the approach behind going big and then going small. The Burlingtons, I thought, let's Burlington specifically at Thanksgiving, I was like, Thanksgiving is one of the only meals that you can pretty reliably bank on families across America eating the same kind of thing, more or less, right? And so what better way to contrast the effect of each family member being on a personalized nutrition thing than to have them in this backdrop of Thanksgiving where, quote unquote, everyone's supposed to be eating the same thing. Well, personalized nutrition is the exact opposite of that, right? And so, there's a lot of just vignettes in there about like how this stuff manifests in everyday life. Like no one is eating one central turkey. Everyone had to switch to quails because everyone's getting their own personalized quail, except for the personalized nutrition people. And there's this whole rift. And so, yeah, I think it's important to kind of like dive into a little bit of that speculative fiction because white papers are loaded with data and facts, but they're hard to relate to, So
I think it makes it come alive. I love the idea of using speculative fiction. And Carlos, I think maybe we have a few of his pictures we could show for people who are watching it, but I say, Mike, I love the ending where you actually make it a little personal where the parents kind of look at each other. Mason looks at Christina and beckons her upstairs to the bedroom.
Oh, I don't have those pictures.
Yeah. And I think you say on her stack glass, she sees the same red glow reflected onto Mason's face. So you had a little almost romance angle to it as well.
There is, but it's like it's at the very end of the story where it's like they both are wearing these. So the fictional platform I've created for this is called Stack. And people that are on it, they have these glasses that have heads up display. This is year 2042 as well too. So you got 52. Sorry. So you got to imagine the Apple Pro has gotten way better, and they both kind of have this little red heart throbbing after all the guests have left, and that is instructing them to go upstairs to their bedroom and make love. And I just think like, oh, how much more can you let technology dominate your lives when it's telling you when to show affection to your partner, So yeah,
those are the millennials kids and the millennials kids that are okay with that stuff. But
yeah, I mean, those parents, 2050, they were born in like 2000. So
that technology has to get better though, because the Apple Vision Pro is not there yet. So that technology has to get better for sure.
We got 30 years.
Yeah.
So what's happening here, Mike? You show people, it's funny. I see people in airports wearing their virtual reality headsets. It's funny. We've seen all the funny memes where they're driving the cyber trucks and swiping left and right. I mean, are we going to see people like, this is a great picture. Are we going to see people in restaurants looking at each other, but both having the VR headsets on at some point?
I mean, so it's totally plausible because I think this idea of like one of the biggest questions I want to explore in that story specifically is this idea that like, okay, we for thousands of years had shared food cultures and a lot of food traditions kind of sprung up after that. What happens in 1,000 years if all of us are kind of agreeing to go on our own way, our own journey to eat, right? And I think that's again why I chose Thanksgiving is that, if everyone's on their own AI optimized food agenda, like I'm not saying it's better or worse per se, but I'm saying that changes food culture, right? Like we all go to a restaurant, 3 of us order something for the table. Well, there's no such thing as that anymore. Like the idea of eating family style doesn't exist anymore. You're on a date and you're having 98% of first dates start at dinners or drinks or something like that. Like what happens when you have this device pinging you to say like, I don't think you should eat that last French fry, So I think, it's just all of these have a twist of dystopia. There's the story after this that is truly dystopian, but like I think it's important to kind of have that dystopia out there because I don't think it would make a very entertaining or insightful story if everything just ended happily ever after, right? Like nobody really signs up to go see that stuff. And I just don't think you learn anything. So the goal in kind of doing this was to say like, look, I know there's a lot of people out there, probably tons of your viewers, are working on parts of this big eventual personalized nutrition stack. I'm not trying to make a commentary to say that we shouldn't do personalized nutrition. I'm not trying to make a judgment call like that. I'm just trying to say like, okay, if we create this thing, there's certain things that could happen that maybe you didn't think of, right? And by reading this story and other stories like it from other future people, can you kind of have that in mind as you're designing the future of personalized nutrition to maybe avoid this story? If you hate this story, that's great in my mind, because that means, and you have something to do about it, I think that's great because now you can avoid what happens to the Burlingtons, you know?
Yeah, you can offer your ideas because of that. Yeah.
So it's so frequently, especially with these huge technologies like personalized nutrition, people are so focused, rightly so, on the work itself that they don't always think of what the outcomes could be, right? And so this is kind of like trying to augment those people working on the nitty-gritty parts of it to say like, okay, let's look up for a little bit and let's kind of imagine a world where we're the dog that actually caught the car. Now what do we do with the car? Do we want this car?
Let me reiterate what Mike said. I think it's super important that you did the fiction in here because there are a lot of boring white papers. There are a lot of just boring information that we probably could use, but we're not entertained by it. And we're in an entertainment culture and society. So I think that's really smart. And then also I like the charts because I'm a chart nerd. And so just seeing all that kind of like vex and area where we are, the score and stuff like that.
I appreciate it.
And also, speaking of stomach sensors, I always TMI on all the shows, but I have a lot I thought you
had some more AI charts coming. Or AI,
okay.
Yeah. Oh no,
preparing myself for.
It's called stomach charts, and they're
stomach
not good.
sensor charts.
They're all going down. It's down and to the left, but down and to the right. So having a stomach sensor would be amazing, and also just some of that ideas that you put in there. I think what is interesting is just like Star Trek. You start building ideas of what could happen, and then that's how it happens. So yeah, maybe it's not those specific goggles. I think it's just gonna be contact lenses in the future. Like we'll just have contacts we'll put in. If some of us don't do well with them, maybe I don't know what we'll do there. But I just think it's, again, you're presenting something just so people can go off of that and create,
Exactly.
Including this thing real quick.
Oh geez.
That's a real thing.
I'm into it. I love all the Japanese toilets.
They've had smart toilets for a while. I know they had some at CES this year. I like that you used the different societal forces that are shaping the world and kind of factor those into the different scenarios. I mean, one of the things we see nowadays, Mike, is just this distrust of people. I mean, you see all the people freaking out with all this misinformation. And I think that misinformation is going to drive usage behavior and could lead to more dystopian outputs or just distrust of big tech, distrust of regulation regimes. And so that has a big shaping effect, I think, on the future when you future cast.
Chapter 1 is all about disinformation in the food industry. So
there's so much of it.
There's so much of it. Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, I spent so much time thinking and working around generative AI and stuff like that, and it's just thinking about these issues. So there's definitely a heavy bent in that in there. And I wanted some people to just kind of think about it and feel something, whether it's positive or negative. I think each is probably good because hopefully it can charge them to take some action or just think differently about the future of food.
Well, you did a great job. And where can people find the book if they want to download this?
Pre-orders are open right now. You can order on mise.market. That's MISE.market. It officially launches next Tuesday. So pre-orders are going to start going out in the mail this weekend. And that's where you can get it. Mise.market. Well,
and it looks beautiful. As you said, you're publishing it in this form of like a magazine almost with different chapters, which I love. It reminded me a little bit of like a more modernist cuisine. You remember when you got those cuisine? I actually get the 4 or 5 giant books. I love the way you're doing that. And I still love physical media, so I can't wait to get my hands on it. So, but we've taken up a lot of your time, Mike, just because we had so much fun talking about this. I enjoyed it. Make sure that you come back again in the future. Maybe in 10 years from now, when one of these futures, we'll see if it actually comes true or not. But
there Carlos, you go.
I love it.
You got any final things to show us, Carlos?
No, that's all for this week. Only one AI thing, but we can go back to it because it's so terrible looking. This is the future. Is the future?
A picture of me at Steak and Shake. Yeah.
That is you. That's like that's what we don't want to happen in fast food restaurants. All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Mike Lee, for joining us. Carlos, as always, thank you. And we'll talk to everyone next week. Have a great week, everyone. See you later.
Guys. Bye.
Bye.